He was flying reconnaissance missions to map out the French coast before the invasion, and then he switched to flying B-17 bombers into Germany, and was shot down, was a prisoner of war, and stayed in the Air Force after the war, and has been awarded many citations, medals, and so forth, as you would expect. And he has retired as the Vice Commander of the Air Force. And so he is going to be our keynote speaker, and we're delighted to have him.
Thank you so much. You know, I really love reunions. I can't think of one that I haven't been really happy about, but you all seem to be really convivial, fellow veterans, and gosh, I couldn't feel any more welcome. So I appreciate the fact that I am here with you. I want you to know I'm proud, but I'm also very humble, because I know your experiences have likewise been interesting and maybe even a little bit dramatic. I had a wonderful occasion not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago as a matter of fact. I was invited to my grandson's wedding. And yeah, you hate to think of yourself being that old, but it was a beautiful wedding. It was one of those beautiful kind. And it happened to be on exactly the same date that my 306 bomb group reunion was. I was honestly, we were really torn. We didn't know whether to. Well, no, that's not true. We had to go to the wedding. But we had a wonderful time. It was outstanding. And as a matter of fact, I met a lot of guys and I learned a lot, because I was mixing with a 30-year-old crowd. And believe it or not, I'm beginning to have faith in people again, because I think even though they said we were the greatest generation, I've been doing a little talking and saying, what's happened? There's a degeneration. We weren't the greatest, because we didn't teach. We didn't teach responsibility. I've been going around talking about that. Then I saw this group of people a couple of weeks ago, and by golly, they're sharp. And one of the guys came up to me and told me he was a B-52 first pilot. 30 years old, right on the nose, just about. A good-looking guy, and full of vivaciousness, and a great addition to the party. And but we stepped aside, and he got to telling me very sincerely, sir, people don't know how bad things are. The sequestration is horrible. It's not really working, but everybody's going to tell you that it is. And then with the shutdown, my gosh, we are lucky if we can call ourselves combat ready. We're talking about strike force. Ladies and gentlemen, we're still veterans. I mean, those of you who are still veterans, we still got to work. We have got to tell the public that we can't take this kind of stuff, that we are patriots who think our country will and must come first. And when I hear 30-year-old guys confirming that and talking about that, it's pretty meaningful. And I feel that the public really, generally, doesn't understand all this. And why is it necessary for us to be defense? Why don't we just let it all go? Why don't we just forget about it? Yeah, everything will work out. Matter of fact, somebody will feed us every day and we don't have to worry about anything. But down deep, I know you guys feel the same way I do. I think we got the best country in the world. I think we got the best military in the world. I think we got the best potential in the world. And I'm going to do everything I can every single day to keep it that way. Now, moving over to my personal story that we were alluding to a moment ago, I had a wonderful jolt, I would say, and it was the biggest, perhaps, of the last century. When Pearl Harbor was hit, and the president came over the air, remember? And he said that this was the greatest disaster that ever happened. And 2 days later, we declared war. Some of you may remember. And I was a real happy college kid. I didn't have any worry in the world. As a matter of fact, I was doing pretty well in college. Had some football scholarship and even was on the stage and enjoying life. But when that announcement was made, 7 days later, I went down to the recruiting office and signed up. And I was lucky. A year later, after a real nice cadet period, I became an officer and a gentleman, it says. And I was still only 20 years old. So you get to thinking, okay, what's next? And you do it with anticipation. I kept thinking, I want more, I want more. And sure enough, I got it. I got assigned to a wonderful twin-engine attack bomber unit, A-20s. In that day, it was like the A-10. You all know about the A-10? Even the flight configuration over the ground, similar. Even the attack configuration, almost the same. It was all a low-level excitement, moves and turns and fast for that time. So as I flew that A-20 around the country and became familiar with it and so on, I realized this is really the best life. And I went to gunnery school down in the New Orleans area, and it was pretty good also as aerial combat. You know, you could fly twin engine and also shoot at targets, in this case tow targets, for practice. And I became excited about the A-20. And it was after a short while, as a matter of fact, I was in New Orleans listening to Andre Castellanos. How many remember Andre Castellanos? Outstanding, beautiful music. And a guy came out on the stage and he said, we have to interrupt this program. Lieutenant Woellner and crew report to operations. And I did, and the next day I was on my way to Europe by C-54. How many remember C-54? Most beautiful four-engine airplane you can imagine, also by Douglas. Four-engine aircraft that the president used, the same kind. All plush and with stewardess. I thought, boy, it's pretty good being an airman. I like it. And we flew the northern route, landing in London, where we were picked up promptly and taken to a base near Swindon. Swindon, England, is in Wiltshire, southeast central. We had a good base there. It was a kind of a typical English base, not like your bases in Italy. Those were all plush. It was a nice little base, though, and we flew the kind of missions that I really was trained to do. We'd go in near the, you had to get out of England first, of course. If you'd take off and you'd go up to a decent altitude, and then immediately as soon as we got to the coast, we'd come down on the deck. You could see the wake behind our airplanes. We didn't fly in close formation, we flew in trail. And when we got to the French coast, we immediately turned to the north over the Normandy beaches. I had no idea what the Normandy beaches were then. Nobody did, except I could see, and I vividly recall the fortifications, the way those guys had dug in and the way they had protected themselves with 4 feet dugouts that were just absolutely bomb. We couldn't do the job with big bombers. We couldn't get rid of them with big bombers. They were there. So we kept taking pictures of it to see how are we going to do it. I still didn't have any idea that's what we were doing. But we had front end cameras in the front end of the airplane. We had a big camera in the bomb bay, and we opened the bomb bay and take it. Couldn't do that at low altitude. But anyway, we go right over the beaches. Then before we got to La Havre, we'd immediately go to 10,000 feet to get away from that fire. And at 10,000 feet, open the bomb bay and take a picture of the whole area. So I flew a number of those missions, and by the way, I should also say that after we take the big picture, and we're supposed to go down and take targets of opportunity. Targets of opportunity is anything from a flak tower to a tank or anything else that you think might be combat threatening. And then, having done that, you can go back across the channel on the deck again. When you see the white cliffs, you say, oh gosh, now I gotta pull up to get over the cliff and then go on to your destination. We were pretty close to the channel, maybe a half an hour. So after a few of those missions, that got to be the most exciting and most interesting, and I liked it. But one day I woke up, and guess what? I found out I was in the 15th Air Force. Hey. And not only that, you're going to Africa with your A-20s. And so I got all adjusted. I was going to go, but I was the last in that organization, so I figured I had to be the first out. They pulled me alone, or maybe I was maybe I was just always the guy that was disagreeing. But I got pulled out and sent to Ireland, Northern Ireland, and I was the first officer to the unit, so therefore I was commanding a small unit that was there for towing targets. We had 4 other pilots, but they were even junior to me. So, did you ever hear anything so funny? You have a big correspondence, and down at the bottom it says, so-and-so, second lieutenant commanding. But I couldn't take that very long. I just really did it, but I couldn't enjoy it. So I asked for heavy bombing and got it within a couple of months of my request. And I was assigned to the 306 bomb group of the 8th Air Force, stationed at Thurlai, which is right there in this almost the center part of England. And well, where did I get that B-17 time? It so happened that among the airplanes that we were towing targets with, there were a couple of B-17s that I had to almost teach myself how to fly that thing. But I had 5 hours, and here I was reporting to combat. And the group commander was a great guy. He said, okay, we got you, and he got me in the squadron 368, and I was a pretty happy guy to be in real combat for a few hours. And then I went on my first mission. I didn't have a crew. So what they did is just let me go with somebody a pilot might be sick or whatever, so I'd take that other crew and go. And so first mission I got over, I think it was Hanover, and oh God, you might remember this, some of you. Oh, I meant to ask, how many pilots are in the room? Few. Okay. How many crew members are in the room? Okay. Well, for those of you who don't really know, when our crews got to the target area, we tried very, very hard. I realized right in the first minute that there's good intelligence. They knew what they even knew exactly where the flak was supposed to go from the ground, and they had an estimate of how many enemy aircraft were going to be up, if in fact they were going to be up at all. And so we go on the mission and they say, we know that the flak is going to be at 25,000 feet, therefore you're going to fly. The flak is going to be at 27, you're going to fly at 29 or 28 or whatever. So we approach the target, and as you approach the target, here is this flak at a solid bedrock like pattern in front of you. It's just nothing but a whole dance floor like completely covered in the sky, only it's black with red and white puffs coming up between it. And he said, boy, oh boy, I hope we got this altitude right. And in many cases it was right. As a matter of fact, it truly was heartening to be able to know that the intelligence was as good as it was. But seeing that flak and see, if you had a target assignment, you didn't have a chance to go around. You had to go over, through it, or whatever. So anyway, that was my first mission, to see that, and it takes your heart right out of you. So I flew a couple more missions like that with not knowing who the crew was going to be. Then they decided, okay, this pilot has got some basic knowledge, more, even though he's young, than one of the others. Coincidentally, because he spent all that time in England in the A-20s, he knows the geography of England better than most new crews coming over. He knows the navigation system in English much better than most of the new crews. So therefore, we're going to let him be the pilot of the new crews, and the pilot of the crew will be the co-pilot. That was a very fascinating concept. And I flew at least 10 missions like that. And the problem is, of course, you don't know the guys you're working with so well. You have to meet them, greet them, and get to know them real fast, and try to get a harmony going that is perfectly acceptable to everybody. But it worked out as well as it could. And I don't know of a better system of introducing new crews to combat than in something like that. Well, anyway, on the last of those kinds of missions, I got to a point where, although I was confident, I was still really trying to teach alertness and caution and watching for aircraft and watching for flak and in this last mission for me, I was even more concerned when I saw that black blanket up above as we were approaching. It was so solid, and those little red flashes, God, they were so really frightening. And this time, it didn't look to me like we had altitude above it, even though we were flying at 30,000 feet, which means to me that those anti-aircraft guys had gotten so sharp that they were either by angle or by power or by some means strengthening those guns so that they could go even higher than they had before. And as we went over it, I thought, oh boy, this is close and uncomfortable. And most of us were over it enough that we didn't get too beat up. But in our case, just as we dropped the bombs, bomb bays are still hanging open. Some part of one of those bombs, a little piece of it, or several pieces of it, came up into that open bomb bay, like that. That's what you really call flat burst. and then right in our Bombay, open. Well, you know, there's all kinds of stuff in that center area. Not to say the most important is top gunner. And so when that happened, the aircraft, of course, kind of bounced pretty hard. And I immediately looked back, and the whole center part of the airplane was engulfed in flame, a solid wall. And you say, what do you think? What just, those of you who have never done it, what do you think? The first thing is that's going to come to your mind when it happens. Self-survival? Well, I don't even think so, because I've learned that it's true with every GI I've ever met. When you think of the guys in Afghanistan that jump away from my circumstance, think of the guys that are in that hot sun, that higher degree weather than it is here and drier than it is here. Think of those guys who are on patrol and who run into a firefight, and some of the guys are dropping. What do they think of first? They're not going to run away and take care of themselves. They've bonded already. They bonded so closely that they care about those guys enough so we just awarded the Legion of Honor to a guy who not only had that happen to him, but he got back in the truck. Remember, the president just did it. He got back in the vehicle that they had and went back and picked up 2 or 3 guys who were lying there wounded and another couple of guys who were dead, because those were his buddies. Those were guys he had bonded with. And he brought them out to safety. Well, it was the same kind of thing I thought about. I thought about, oh gosh, there's a crew here that even though I don't know them all that well, they're my crew. And I look back at this wall of fire burning intensely. Oh my gosh. I did everything I'm supposed to do. I did the whistle, I did the blow, I did the bells, I did everything. So, what am I going to do? If I get out of that seat and try to go back there, I'm at 30,000 feet. There is no oxygen. There's no. You couldn't even get back to help anybody, even if you wanted to. If you tried to even change from a fixed oxygen mask to a walk around, you'd have to do it pretty fast at 30,000 feet under the. You don't worry about these things now. They don't even fly at 30,000 feet anymore. Now they fly at 45. So anyway, I did think of the crew, and I still do. I looked over at my co-pilot, and I said, out, 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 out. And he said, no. He was thinking about his crew too. But he started to resist enough so that I had to literally drag that guy out of that seat and hope that he got to the hatch. Hope. Because I was also concerned with other things. I wanted to set the controls so that it didn't run back into the squadron. I want all that stuff. So anyway, I got him out of sight, so I hope he got out. But he didn't. We never heard from him again. The rest of the guys in the front got out. The bells got the tail gunner and a couple of the gunners out, but we lost 5 guys. And I still think of that often. Myself, after it looked like everything was clear, nobody around and burning back there, I got out of my seat and went down to that hatch. As soon as I took my mask off, I knew I don't have a whole lot of time here. And it's a miracle to me still. How could I get from nearly 30,000 feet? Even if I was stacked down, I wouldn't be stacked down any more than 1,000 feet. So, let's say I was at 29. Can you envision on a B-17 how big that hatch is? Can you think of that little hatch in your garage door, not the long one, the little short one. And I got a parachute on my back. I don't know how we squeezed through that. I really don't. But the guys in front did, except for the co-pilot. And after squeezing through that little hatch, I pulled the cord and began to wonder if that was going to work. First of all, worrying about oxygen, and now I'm going to worry about whether the shoe's going to work. But it did, and I was oscillating a little bit, which is very nauseating for those of you who haven't done it. And I look back at my airplane, and it's burning. Smoke is coming out of it. One engine has failed. And I'm drifting on down. I was really pleased, and I was kind of exhilarated. Here came a P-51 pilot, and he came cruising around and looks up, and he goes, he gives me a salute, and I saluted back. Okay, buddy, I wish I were in your backseat. And I drifted down a little bit more, and the next thing I realized, I'm looking at the most magnificent landscape. Oh my gosh, I must have been at 20,000 feet, and I'm looking at beautiful German countryside and appreciating, it's ridiculous. I appreciated the beautiful scenery. Honestly, it was a winter scene. There was a lot of snow, but it was patchy snow. And you could see the fields laid out, you could see the fields partitioned, you could see trees along the line, and groves of trees in one place and another. Beautiful, sun shining beautifully. Couldn't have been more beautiful. Just that kind of breathtaking away scenery. So, well, that didn't last much longer than a few minutes, but because I looked down, and down below me, there's a whole army of private citizens, a little bit upset and disturbed about what just happened in their backyard. And they were coming from all directions. And the closer I got to ground, the more I realized they've all got weapons. They got some kind of a weapon. They got a gun, or they got a scythe, or they got a rake, or they got something. And I thought, well, I thought I had enough ordeal back there. I'm going to get it again. And believe it or not, I'm not bragging. I just want you to know, I got an Air Force pride. I said, by golly, I'm going to land on my 2 feet. I'm going to land straight. I'm going to land strong. And I'm going to fold my shoe bingo like that. And it's going to be so perfect that they're going to have some respect, maybe. Well, I did that. And they didn't have any respect. And they surrounded me very tightly. And as a matter of fact, I was a little bit concerned. But just as it got the most frightening, I heard verboten, verboten, verboten. And the home guard, a bunch of guys, I was going to say almost as old as I, but nobody's that old. These old home guard guys were ordered to protect us, thankfully. So they came up and formed a cordon around me, and then walked me right through the town we just hit, which was Frankfurt, the western Frankfurt, not the one on Main. Excuse me. Walking through a town that you just have hit is another interesting thing in an education. Buildings were half standing, some of them. People were still running around trying to take care of their own personal problems. There were ambulances all over the place. Even though we had an particularly absolute accurate hit, we still have this collateral damage. And so I had to go right through that town with the people lining up, looking at me and throwing things and wishing that this guy they're seeing could be obliterated. That's an education in itself. Well, I only had to go through that town from front end to the back end, and before they finally put me in an isolated office room and held me there until the regular German authorities could come and take me as a prisoner. And that was all very, very quick. I think within one day I was in the hands of the Luftwaffe and on my way to the first stop by train was the interrogation camp. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the interrogation camp. Those things are built to do the job. They're built to take away your memory. They're built to take away everything you got. The first thing you do is throw you in an isolation room. An isolation room in Germany at that time consisted of a closed room that was tightly closed. There was no way of getting in, no way of getting out. There was no air coming in except through one duct. And there was no way that you could get into the room except through one door. And in that door there was a hole at the bottom about this wide and this thick. And that's where they put a bowl of soup that you got each day. In the morning, they turned the heat up to about 140. And all day long you were in that 140 heat and sweating. And you took off all your clothes. And just hoped that the day would go. There's nothing else in the room. One blanket. And then at night they turned that off. And this prison camp was up on the Baltic. The interrogation camp was a little south of that. So it was in North Germany and it was cold. It was ice cold at night. So you go from literally over 100 degrees someplace, and at night it would drop off to the outside temperature, which is usually around 0 when I was there. So this kind of thing went on for, in my case, not very long. Only you guys or those guys who were in Vietnam and Japan got treated, so much worse. And I often think about that. I was lucky compared to what they had to go through. At any rate, after 3 or 4 weeks, about 4 weeks of that, total isolation. I didn't see a soul. I didn't see one person in all that few weeks, and only got soup, usually made of rutabagas. And it finally came, opened the door, and oh my God. And I was taken to and introduced to my inquisitor. And he was a real handsome, good-looking German guy with all kinds of ribbons, all kinds of decorations. And his uniform was sharp. He looked really great. And he said, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you, Lieutenant. Sit down and let's have a little talk." And it was so typically interrogator style. And he'd keep hammering those basic questions about where I was from and all that stuff that he already knew. He knew it by virtue of what was on the tail of my airplane after it hit the ground. Even if it was totally demolished, there's enough there that he could tell everything he wants to know. It tells him everything he wants to know. So I had to endure that, which I did rather pleasantly, because there was a beautiful girl there who was allowed to come over and offer me a sandwich in a tray that was Woellner braided and included a whole bunch of other sandwiches. But I only was allowed to take one. And as we talked, I could eat this sandwich. Oh my gosh, it was so good. But when he got finished with his interrogation, which was really rather short because there's nothing I can tell him, and he asked a lot of questions, but I couldn't tell him anything. And at the end of it, however, he said, "Well, Lieutenant, it's nice to have talked to you. I enjoyed it very much." He said, I hope you appreciate now that for you, the war is over." And I said, "Well, sir, maybe so. But I want you to know that as long as I'm here, or anybody like me who's here, somebody else is going to be coming after me." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, okay, you may be right. And I just walked out. Spent another week in the incarcerated there before going on to my permanent camp. Now, just a couple of words on the permanent camp. I know a lot of you read a lot of stuff about that. Those camps were built with as cheap a labor as they could possibly get. Not really built up and furnished as well as a lot of people may think. The only thing that saved us during the period of time that I was there was the fact that we did get Red Cross parcels, and so with the Red Cross parcels, some of which had flavoring in it, we could somehow or another make that horrible soup a little bit tolerable. Also, they had a little bit of chocolate in each of those boxes that the Red Cross brought. And that chocolate went very well because at night sometimes we'd get a guy to climb out the window and get snow, and he'd fix it up in a nice way, and we'd have a snow cone with chocolate on it. And if we didn't have that chocolate, just eating snow is not nearly as desirable. But we did get every morning a formation that was there entitled, our entitlement to keep in physical shape according to the rules, and but that's about it. And I learned, frankly, that there is nothing more important than being able to contain yourself, because always I felt like exploding. Always I felt like telling us on our gun what I really felt. Those guys that were hovering over us, and if we moved into the zones that we weren't supposed to be, they literally did shoot. I tried to get a guy in the next compound to throw a cigarette package over to me, and it landed just inside the compound, maybe about a yard. And if I stepped in there, they could shoot. That was allowable. As a matter of fact, that did happen. But I left it there, and finally the guard said, go ahead and pick it up. And then it was time. The war was over. And I was very fortunate. I was allowed to leave the camp momentarily. I mean, in total times. That meant I could leave the camp for a day or two. We were waiting for transport to take us out. And the Russians who had overtaken our camp said, if you don't appreciate what we got doing here for you, well, you are not very grateful. Go, have fun, do your thing. And so a lot of guys literally went on out of the camp. They would milk cows, they would do whatever they needed to try to build themselves back up. But most of us contained ourselves until our resources arrived to take us out of there. And on the fourth or fifth day, after it was all over, after all the Russians did all their thing, well, I must tell you one quick anecdote. The Russians were more feared to the German people than the German authorities were at their worst. And when they realized that the Russians were coming, many of them committed suicide or tried to escape further to the west. And when we were told to get out of the compound and enjoy ourselves, some of us at least went up to the North Sea and walked along the coast. As I did that one day, I ran into a very gruesome sight. It was a little baby buggy at the top, like as though it's covering the infant from the sun. On the ground next to the baby buggy, we discovered a young woman about 20. And next to her was an elderly woman, or more elderly, probably around 50, and a gun lying right next to them. They had killed the baby, killed themselves, rather than have the Russians come in on them. So the whole world seems so much more beautiful after you've seen some of those sort of things. And it makes it even more important that we do everything we can, as long as we live, to keep this America the way it is, by the people, of the people, and for the people, and not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Dave, and Dean, it's awfully nice for you to be here, and Kim also. And I want to say this, that this was somewhat of an experiment. You know, we invited 3 other bomb groups to team up with us, and we have ended up with representatives from as many as, I think, 9 or 10 bomb groups at this meeting. Now, as I've gone around, I found that there's very, very little difference between things that we did and things we enjoy. And I want to thank all of you for making such a special effort to come here. I know we've got people in their early 90s that it wasn't easy to get through those airports. And so let's just say that I think this is the wave of the future, that teaming up, recognizing that we're just really a band of brothers. And to have meetings like this is going to be necessary to continue to combine forces. So we've got more things to do this evening.